Tim Barnett wants to talk about the Kalam Cosmological Argument, even though it makes no sense to anyone with even a tenuous grasp on reality. But this is stands against reason we're talking about, right? So, let's go down the religious rabbit hole. It still surprises me that anyone takes these idiotic theological arguments seriously, but unfortunately, a lot of people still do. Mostly, it's the people who don't know any better and, frankly, don't want to, because these aren't legitimate arguments for the existence of a real God. They are bald rationalizations for why the intellectually destitute and emotionally bankrupt can still take these ideas seriously in a world that's increasingly realizing just how dumb it all is. And Tim Barnett is here to help. Well, help show that he hasn't got a clue. But that's really not a surprise anymore, is it?
Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The premise seems so obvious, it seems so reasonable, yet some are willing to sacrifice common sense and reason to avoid where this premise leads.
And, as we shall see, the same out that the wording of that statement gives your God, we can give the universe. Because this isn't about finding a cause, it's about arbitrarily assigning one. Kalam is absurdly fallacious. So let's go take a look at that.
The Kalam Cosmological Argument states that whatever begins to exist has a cause.
They have to insert that begins part, because the original cosmological argument stated that anything that exists has a cause, and people started asking the uncomfortable question, well, what caused God? And they can't have that, can they? So this is a carefully crafted statement that they can just arbitrarily declare that God has existed forever, thus it just doesn't apply to him. Well, says who? Because this is a major problem with the theistic side that they simply don't want to address.
The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause.
That's not necessarily the case, because since time came into existence at the same instant that the universe did, there was never a time when the universe did not exist. Thus, for all intents and purposes, the universe has existed forever, if that word has any meaning at all in this context. You can't talk about what happened before t equals 0, because without time, there can't be anything before. It's not even a rational concept.
Now, this is a logically valid argument, which means that if the premises are true, then the conclusion follows.
But, as I've already shown, the premises are not true, at least as long as our ideas about the Big Bang and cosmology are correct. Because if time and space are linked, if space-time is a thing, then by definition, you can't have one without the other, and temporality simply ceases to exist prior to the moment of the Big Bang. And again, we can't even talk about anything prior, because without time, that word is meaningless. This is really hard to comprehend because we as humans have no experience with atemporality. In fact, without time, it's pretty much impossible to have any experiences at all, isn't it? The religious rely on this lack of comprehension to try to spin a tale that sounds kosher to people who don't think about it too hard, but to the rational, it's just a word salad. It doesn't actually mean anything.
Now, given that the second premise, that the universe began to exist, is supported by both observational physics and theoretical physics, those who want to avoid the conclusion are forced to deny the first premise.
No, we're forced to point out that the first premise makes absolutely no sense. It's like saying that you can have color without light. Color is simply light refracted off of an object. If there was no light, if light had never existed, if there was no such thing as light, then there would also be no such thing as color. It's like talking to a person who's been blind since birth about the color red. They've got no reference for discussing it. They might comprehend the concept, but what if the concept had never existed? You might as well be talking about blah, blah, blah. What is it? Who knows? Can you imagine it without having any idea what it is? Of course not. But the religious, they're not deep thinkers, and those are the people that Tim is appealing to.
Now, when someone denies that whatever begins to exist has a cause, I have a question for them. How did you come to that conclusion?
You seem to think that God has no cause. How did you come to that conclusion? Where is your evidence? Because I've already explained it in this instance, but you have no explanation, no rational explanation at all, other than, it says so in my book of mythology. Other than, it's what I want to believe, or it feels good to think so. But you have absolutely no rational concept of anything lasting forever, or anything not beginning. It is entirely beyond your experience, and you're only positing the claim because it gets you around the problem that this argument makes. It's exactly why people like William Lane Craig came up with Kalam, because the old school cosmological arguments caused some really uncomfortable moments when people said, everything that exists had a cause. Oh, wait.
What are the reasons that you have for thinking that something like cows or comets or the cosmos can begin to exist without a cause of its existence? All of our experience supports the first premise.
Our experience. That doesn't mean that things don't exist outside of our experience, because we have no direct experience with quantum mechanics, with quarks, with subatomic particles. But that doesn't mean that they aren't real. We just can't directly experience them. This is just an appeal to common sense, and as I've said before, common sense is unfortunately not all that common.
Something cannot come into being uncaused out of nothing.
Except the aforementioned quantum particles, which we're now finding can pop into existence from nothing all the time. But again, it's beyond our direct experience, so yeah, we don't talk about that.
In fact, this is a metaphysical principle that seems to govern all of reality without any known exception. Imagine a mom is cleaning up her son's bedroom and she finds cigarettes. When she confronts her son, he tells her that those cigarettes just popped into existence in his bedroom uncaused out of nothing. Should she believe him?
Well, of course not. But if he said that the quantum particles in his bedroom did, then yes, she should. He's telling the truth. And once this becomes better known and more widely known in the population, the religious are going to have to modify the wording in their arguments again to find a way to get around it. They can't just admit that they're wrong, that all of these philosophical arguments are just scams to begin with, and that they're just desperately trying to defend an idea that's not rationally defensible. Honesty doesn't even enter into it.
No, why not? Something cannot come from nothing.
Then explain how you think God created everything from nothing. Because that's your side. But yeah, we don't talk about that, do we?
Believing that something can come from nothing is actually worse than magic.
God. Poof. Everything. Figure it out.
At least when a magician pulls a rabbit out of the hat, well, there's a hat and a magician. In my opinion, most people who deny the first premise are not being intellectually honest.
No. That's the people making this argument in the first place. They are relying on the ignorance of their audience not to know how any of these concepts actually work. You notice they're not trying this on the theoretical physicists, right? Because theoretical physicists know it's all bunk. No, they're using these fallacious arguments on the desperately gullible who really want the conclusions to be true, and they want to think that there's a good reason to believe in any of it, even though there's not.
They don't really believe that things can come into existence uncaused out of nothing.
No, that's you. Why are the religious so confused on this point?
But they don't want to face the conclusion that the universe has a transcendent cause, a cause that is beyond time and space, that's immaterial and extremely powerful.
Because not only is none of that demonstrable, but it's incoherent. What does being beyond time even mean? That's just a bunch of made-up gobbledygook. There is nothing in that statement that stands up to the light of reason at all. Not for an instant. It's just dumb.
This sounds too much like God.
No, it sounds like you have an overactive imagination. You have an emotional attachment to this ridiculous God idea, therefore you're doing everything in your power to pretend that God is more reasonable than he actually is. Because you can't actually know any of the things that you claim to know about God. It's all things that you pulled right out of your backside and you desperately want them to be true. How do you know any of this? How did you independently test any of these ideas to see if any of them were factually correct? Because if you didn't, if you can't back up any of them intellectually, then screw you. You're just being an idiot.
As a result, they exchange what's intuitive and from our experience for what is irrational.
Because whether you like it or not, our experience is not representative of everything in reality. But let's be honest, you're doing exactly the same thing. We have no demonstrable experience with any God, but you're pretending that one is out there. You're using this imaginary God as a catch-all for anything you cannot immediately answer, anything that you can't wrap your puny little head around. Well, it's gotta be God. And then you pretend that that's not you when you're the only culprit around. Because, as I've said many, many times, if you don't have an actual answer, if you don't have a demonstrable answer, a defensible answer, then the only thing that you can rationally say is, I don't know, and keep looking. Making something up that makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside just because you want an answer, that's not a rational way of looking at the world. But these are not rational people. These are emotional people. These are people who want something that feels good, but that they don't have to think about too hard. Good thing too, because the more you think about their ideas, the more you examine their claims, the more ludicrous they all become. And that's because they just don't care. An intelligent person would watch my video and say, you know, the religious are just spouting nonsense. This argument is dumb. I'm going to reject it. But the religious are not intelligent people, at least not when it comes to their religious beliefs. They believe it because it feels good, and they cling to these nonsensical arguments because they're both too ignorant to know better and too intellectually stunted to care. And people like Tim capitalize on this fact. Yeah, that's something to be proud of, isn't it?
Boom, dicky, 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 boom, dicky,